Welcome to the Equity Teacher Leader Podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Rachael Mahmood. In this podcast, we'll dive into the stories, the voices, and the expertise of incredible teacher leaders who are making a difference through the equity work they do in their classrooms and their communities. Welcome back to another episode of Equity Teacher Leader. Today, I have a very special guest on with us today. As you know, as the 2024 Illinois Teacher of the Year, I'm committed to elevating the voices of amazing teacher leaders across the state of Illinois. And today I'm super excited to have Jacqueline San Diego, the 2024 Special Education Teacher of the Year for the state of Illinois, on the podcast with us. How you doing today, Jacqueline?
Hello, Rachel. Yes, I am so excited to be here. Woot woot to being the Special Education Teacher of the Year. It is absolutely such an honor, and it's been a long journey, and I am just so excited to continue being in this leadership space and also being in a leadership space with you. So this is wonderful. Thank you so much for inviting me.
Absolutely. I mean, from the moment that I met you, I felt like we were kindred spirits. There's a lot of identity story that we share. We may have an age gap of just a few years, but in my heart, I feel like I'm also the same age as you. I can't wait to dive into some of our shared identity story. But before we do that, why don't you share with everyone like where you work and what you teach?
Yeah, so I am a special education teacher specifically for high school right now at a charter school in Chicago. I actually teach in the neighborhood that I grew up in, so it is a full circle moment for me. The school didn't exist when I was younger, but it does now. So it is nice to just be back in the same neighborhood that I grew up in and to be involved with so many beautiful cultures and our school community. Our families are absolutely wonderful.
That's so awesome. And that's in which neighborhood was that in again?
It's in the Belmont-Cragen neighborhood in Chicago, which is on the northwest side.
Nice, nice. I'm a big fan of Chicago. You're so incredibly lucky to work in a great neighborhood. Our entire city of Chicago is just so beautiful when it comes to all the different cultures. And one of the reasons that I felt so incredibly connected to you was because we're both Asian. And I know that we're both half Asian, actually.
And we're mixed, exactly, yes.
And both of ours have our dads that are Asian and our moms that are European. So that is also very interesting. It was something to connect on. And when I think about being Asian, I know with my parents, there was a lot of push for me to go into the medical field. So much so my dad was like, I'll buy you a car if you become a doctor. And I was like, I want to be a teacher. And he's like, teacher? How will you pay your bills? A lot of pressure to go to med school. Did you experience the same pressure in your family?
Yes, of course I did. I think obviously being a daughter of immigrants, my family was very focused on just putting bread and butter on the table, a roof over my head. And they didn't know how to navigate the education system. And so for me, it was always like a lawyer, maybe a doctor. My dad's like, maybe a nurse. And so, I had all of those careers and those ideas thrown at me. And so I thought like maybe, and I wouldn't say that I wasn't fully interested in those things. I definitely was. And I think that kind of ties into me being a teacher. I didn't actually go to college to become a teacher, but I knew that I really wanted to help and to cater back. And I wanted to be a public servant in some capacity. And so after I graduated, I actually did Teach for America.
And about what Teach for America is.
Yes.
Before you get too much further into the story, I know
no
it was
problem.
something that I hadn't heard about before I met you. So
yeah, so I actually haven't heard of that until after I graduated. Teach for America is a nonprofit organization that recruits qualified people to teach in our underserved areas and populations, and it's all over the U.S. And so there is this matching system, kind of similar to someone who would, apply to med school. And so I put Chicago as my top because not only did I grow up here, I knew that it was a city that was a high need area and they needed teachers. They needed good teachers. And so even though I didn't go to school to be a teacher, I still had a lot of those skills, and Teach for America set me up for success. They put me into the summer institute. There was a lot of training on it. But realistically, until you're in the classroom, you are learning all of your experience or all of your skills right there on the floor. So throughout this program, I ended up getting my master's program, and I am still at my placement school. So it has been about 7 years thus far, and I haven't left. And I just recently actually did a fellowship with Teach for America that is called Leaders of Color for System Change. So I am still very closely tied to the organization. It's just an absolutely fantastic network of professionals, of teachers, of educators who are still focused on creating change, positive change.
That's amazing. I think I always start a lot of my keynotes with every educator has a story of why they come into education and why they choose to stay. And I think, if you're not in the education world or you typically go those traditional routes, you may not realize how many people took non-traditional routes to becoming a teacher and how every route that you take absolutely enriches the field of education. We need all different types of educators with all different backgrounds, with all
Mhm.
different training to meet the
And I
needs of our diverse students.
Exactly. And I also think that it's important to voice yourself. I think for me at the beginning, I was so scared to voice myself because I felt like a rookie. And I was, but my rookie voice still mattered. And I think that took some time for me to learn. And so now, as a teacher leader and someone who is a TFA alum, I continuously tell new alum or new members, voice yourself, express your concerns, express your ideas and your interests. If you want to do something new, why not? I think it's definitely a way for you to start gaining more knowledge in the field. Because if you don't voice yourself, then you're just kind of hiding in the background, and that's okay too. I think it takes time to build up that comfort.
Yeah, and definitely. I think that there's this big myth around you can only be a teacher leader once you've been in the career for 20 years. And that's not the case. Every single teacher is a leader because you're in charge of a
Mhm.
classroom and you're in charge of students. And not only that, but you want to be a person who's innovating the field of education and bringing your expertise, your love, your passion, and your ideas to
Mhm.
better the field. And that's what makes great leaders. So I don't think there's a timestamp on there. We should all be voicing our ideas and our passion and our innovation in the field of education throughout our entire career. You bring up some
100%.
great point, great point. So
I think just like the new teachers, like one thing I would say is that they go into the classroom and they can teach so much to a veteran teacher. They have more skills, new skills that they've, learned, and strategies that they've gained. And so bring that all into the classroom, bring their experiences, just as we tell our students to bring their experiences to the classroom. And so I think that's something that I definitely push on, especially with not only new teachers, but also my students. So I'm excited to talk a little more about that later.
yes, no, absolutely. And I think that is such a great point that you bring up. That's one of the reasons why I love taking preclinical teachers and student teachers in my classroom because when I see them teach a lesson, they give me new ideas. They refresh my passion, my energy for teaching. While I can share with them a lot of time-tested strategies and things I've learned over the years, they can share with me what's new, what's innovative and exciting. And their own personalities. I definitely want to get into how you have your students co-teach with you. So as our listeners can find out in each episode, each one of our teacher leaders is going to share a concrete strategy of something you can do in your classroom that makes you an equity teacher leader. And so, Jacqueline, I've heard all about this co-teaching model that you have with your students where they're up there teaching lessons alongside you. Can you explain what does that look like in your special education classroom?
Yeah. So I am in a separate room, separate class setting, which is the most restrictive setting at my school. I have not always been in this setting. I've been in co-taught settings previously to this, where I did have a co-teacher. But when I am the solo teacher in my small classroom, what I really want to do is I want to give my kids leadership experience. I also don't want to be standing in front of them and just word vomiting a bunch of information,
It takes me back to Bueller, Bueller,
Yes.
Bueller.
So I know I don't want to do that. And I know they don't want to hear that. They don't want to be in a classroom where they're just stagnant and sitting and it's this monotonous routine. Routine is important, but I build in opportunity for them to gain leadership skills within the curriculum. And so, with that being said, obviously I have to get to know my kids. And being in this setting, I do get the privilege of teaching them for a year, 2 years, sometimes for 4 years, depending on where they're at. Because I'm a special education teacher, this is no news. I've also taught in various subjects like world studies and biology. So they have seen me in different places as well, even in physics. So I really bring a lot of those experiences into my classroom for them to show them that everything kind of connects, right? Math is everywhere. And that is where I'm teaching them right now in that separate class setting. And so what I really want is for all of my kids to get up on the board, teach me how to do it, show me, we divide up into groups, right? Where I have a teacher leader in a group and they are showing other peers what they did, what their strategy was, what their method is, and how they broke down a word problem. I cannot say how impressed I am with just words. You just have to see it. I have had a student actually who I've taught. He's currently a junior now, still in my class, but I've taught him in world studies and I've taught him in biology. And so I've had him for a little while. And he recently wrote a journal, not in my class, but in the English class. And he talked about how he had to publicly speak and sing and present in our world studies class. And thanks to my phenomenal co-teacher, he is amazing. He's developed this amazing curriculum for our kids that is very well-rounded. And he brought that up and he said, thanks to Miss San Diego for pushing me to speak and to sing in front of the class. And it was fun, but obviously very nerve-wracking. And now what I see in my math class, as he is now a junior, is just confidence. He is so ready to graduate. I have seen so much growth, and he is helping other peers out. His 9th graders, 10th graders in the class, all the students kind of look up to him, not only because he's older, but because he demonstrates a lot of those leadership skills and confidence and maturity in the classroom. So it's nice to see just like the linear trajectory of growth for some of my students, especially from class to class. And the fact that they also can reflect on past experiences where they didn't feel so hot, but now they do. And they are so grateful for those opportunities and experiences.
Right, right. And you know what? That totally makes sense too, because I remember that as a student, I had no idea where a comma went in any of my writing. And I remember getting up there my first year as a teacher, and I'm like, oh my gosh, I have to teach grammar. Like that was where I struggled the most. But it was somewhere in between explaining what a dependent clause was and an Oxford comma and a series, where all of a sudden I was like, oh my gosh, this makes sense. And sometimes when you're in that teacher role, it all of a sudden clicks when you're trying to break it down and explain it to somebody else. It clicks in a new way. So I can definitely see how your students being in that co-teacher model where they're explaining to their peers not only builds their confidence, but also can build their understanding of the content. I do something similar in the elementary. I'll have the kids like line up kind of like speed dating, but it's definitely not speed dating because it's elementary. And I'll put the students that are a little bit stronger with like their backs, let's say, to the door, and the kids that are struggling a little bit with their backs to the window. And then they'll have 1 minute to teach the math concept or do the math problem number 1 on the worksheet with the person across from them. And then when the timer goes off, everyone gets up and they move down 1 seat, and then they have to teach problem number 2 to the next person. And then what happens is, as the teachers move down and the students move the opposite direction, pretty soon the students end up rotating to the teacher side. And then the teachers are rotating to the student side. And now the kids that were struggling a little bit more with the concept have an opportunity to teach back the concept to the students who know and can kind of guide them through it. And so, very similar idea of the students doing the teaching, but again,
Mhm.
empowering, builds confidence, kind of makes it fun. Now, I have a really important question to ask you about
Sure.
this co-teaching model, because if somebody wants to try this out in their classroom, they might want to know exactly what it looks like. So, do your high school students have to make lesson plans
Of
for?
course not. But I do ask them for input. I ask them for
Okay.
feedback. And if they want it to be more fun, if they want a game, I'm not going to lie to you. Thankfully, we do have alternative intelligence that sometimes helps me convert a game into math, right? And so I definitely take those ideas and I implement that. But I also I allow them to make some decisions. But, anyways, what does it look like? How do I
Yeah, like
do it?
explain to us, like if I was a teacher and I was like, oh my gosh, I've never thought about having my students up there teaching. I know I've used like building thinking classrooms before with like vertical whiteboards in math. Some people think we can't be culturally responsive in math, but this is culturally responsive in math. You're using
Mhm.
orality, which helps our oral cultures. You're using, reverse coaching. You're empowering the students to be leaders, choice, gamifying instruction. All of those things
Mhm.
are very culturally responsive. Even just allowing kids to stand up, to move around the classroom are very helpful for communal learners. So what would teachers like do first? How would they go about like explaining to their students how this process was going to look like? How would their students prepare to be in that teacher role?
Yeah, I think the first thing I would say is that you really want to build in multisensory strategies in your curriculum. When I have multisensory strategies in my curriculum, then I have more flexibility to give students opportunity to get up there and to teach. It does require a little bit of creativity, but that's the first thing I will say. And then I echo what you talked about in regards to being able to move around, getting up on the board. We do something very similar to that and it'll vary. It's not the same thing every single day, but when I have my kids go up on the board and teach, one, I allow them to make mistakes, and it's totally okay because that's how we learn. And I make mistakes. And sometimes instead of being like, wow, I definitely messed up, I will turn that into a question and say, can someone catch the mistake that I intentionally but unintentionally made? Right. And so I tell them, like, that's okay. But, you know, obviously I need to know my kids first. But what happens is in a regular co teaching class, I often parallel teach. And so I will have my teacher's assistant for the week, for the quarter, pull a group of students that I know need support, and they are going to go into a corner and they're going to go ahead and pull up the board and teach them everything that they do step by step. And that requires some trust for me to know that they're going to be able to do that. But also, other kids want to hear this student teach. Um, in addition to that, I sometimes have them like, you know what, you're guiding class today. Here are the slides. Let's see how you do. And they are public speaking. And sometimes it's like a little silly, but the kids love it. Their peers cheer them on. It builds community. And, sometimes people are like, I want to be a teacher leader now. I want to be the assistant. And that is like the spiral effect that happens, right? They see another friend of theirs being successful, being proud of the work that they're doing, having their voice heard, and other kids want that too. And it might look different for every single student, right? Depending on what the lesson is. But oftentimes when we are doing additional examples, instead of, I do, we do, you do, sometimes it just becomes, let's just do this together, but I'm taking a step back. I don't always want to be at the forefront because it is their classroom. And the kids are just so open to helping each other out, even the teacher assistant. I will say that it helps me out as a teacher, especially in the special education setting. Being able to develop their independence is very important. And I want them to not only have math skills to succeed in not just my class, other classes, and in life, but I also want them to be functioning, successful citizens of society that are
Absolutely.
independent and confident. And if you can go up and talk in front of our classroom and you can teach something, you already have a skill that is going to help you out in the workforce.
Buy-in too. You know,
Yeah.
in a special education classroom or any classroom where students have learned helplessness, where they've struggled for a long time, where they're not confident in a subject area, or they feel like a passive observer, you put them in the active role of teaching, of driving the learning in the classroom, having responsibility, being the leader. I mean, there's a lot of buy-in to being invested in your class. And really, that's the first step to learning is the belief that you can learn, right? The buy-in that you're going to participate fully and be present in the lesson. And the person that has to be the most present is the person up there teaching, right? Because
Yeah.
they're holding all the cards in their hand. So I absolutely love that empowerment. Students need to be in the driving seat of their own learning and giving them the opportunity to co-teach, to be a teaching assistant, to be a
Mhm.
student assistant, to actually get up there and run through the Google slides. I'm thinking about some of our students who might be the most challenging in our classroom. Let's flip the dynamics on them. Let's ask
Mhm.
them to be the leaders of the classroom and see how
Yes.
they shine when they're
You
given
know,
opportunities, especially those kids who love to talk in school like me.
of course.
You love to talk in school, you're probably a
Mhm.
teacher. You can get paid to talk all day long in school.
Yeah. I will say my students who love to talk, they are all about this. But even my students who are a little shy at first, I have to set them up for success, right? I give them a little checklist of what this looks like, questions to ask. I show them like, how do you know that the class is paying attention, that you have their attention? And they have this for themselves, right? This little checklist of like, okay, I'm ready. And eventually they get so comfortable I just take away that checklist or, their little script of what things they should say when they're walking someone through a problem. And I work on it with them. So the ones that don't feel as comfortable, they are also prepared. And so just like anyone, right? Like I had to prepare. What am I going to say? What am I teaching? I can't just
Yeah.
stand up here. And so even now, I actually am a part of this little coffee shop at school. It's called like an Uber Eats version of it, right? Like the school eats. And so the kids actually deliver coffee and warm beverages and snacks and treats to teachers, and they order and they got to pay. We want their money, but the kids, we have our leaders in our classroom, and the same kids are also in my classroom right now. And in this club, our leaders are showing the new kids, how do you do this? What do you say? They're giving them constructive feedback like, hey, next time, instead of, you know, tossing a sugar packet at the teacher, gently, maybe next time you just offer this to them. And so there's different ways that we do this. And then I take the kids that I know in my math class have got the math, and I'm like, you are going to go charge and you're counting up how much money we made. You are, giving them the bill, and they are so proud. And so the same student who did that reflection of being a public speaker now feeling confident is now like, I didn't feel so confident in my math skills, but guess what? I have this important role and I'm charging teachers now for their, drinks and their snacks.
Work experience for them, really,
Yes, it
That's
is.
amazing.
It's funny because he's like, I'm going to add this to my resume. I'm like, you should.
Yeah,
100%.
absolutely.
100%.
I love that. No, that is so amazing. I mean, the work you're doing with your students, putting them in the driver's seat of learning, making it applicable, making it real life, giving them those tools, but also like letting them be part of the co-creation of what
Mhm.
learning looks like in your classroom. All of those things make you an amazing equity teacher leader. Thank you for sharing those strategies with us. I want to ask you before we leave a question I like to ask all my podcast guests is if you could create a student success playlist of songs, of quotes, of stories that inspire you to keep teaching, what would be on that playlist? We have to have a fun question at the end.
Yeah, yeah. I'll give you a song, but I also have a quote.
Okay. Are you
Um,
going to sing the
this
song? Because that's important.
Maybe I will. It's also my favorite song since I was a kid. Ain't No Mountain High Enough, Marvin Gaye and Tammy Terrell. Absolutely amazing, because you got to know that there is no mountain high enough, right? But I also say, and I kind of go into a TED Talk in my classroom, is that I repeatedly say this quote of the power of yet. And believe it or not, I have had a student listen to one of my stories and he blurted out, "Yet, you don't have this yet." And I almost started crying. I was like, wow, that was a touching moment, like we're not just learning math in this class, but we are learning some real life lessons. And you might not know everything now. You might not have everything right now, but you will, right? You don't have it yet. You don't know it yet.
I love that. Absolutely. And so for those listeners out there that are striving to be an equity teacher leader from your classroom, you may not be there yet, but definitely through all the episodes we'll be sharing this year and through your own practice, you are an equity teacher leader, actually. You don't need a fancy.
There is no mountain high enough.
It's true. I thought you were doing a Sister Act reference there. Ain't no mountain high. No, wait, river wide enough to keep.
Yep.
I don't know if Sister Act is too old for you, or if that's also in your.
No, I do remember it. Yep.
That was a fun movie to watch when I was younger. Now I'm wondering why I was watching that when I was younger.
Sometimes we got to bring the Sister Act back in the classroom.
There we go. Go. So anyways, great teaching movies of all time, Sister Act. Going back to, again, you don't need a fancy title. You don't need a fancy position to be an equity leader. Every teacher is an equity leader right from their classroom. The things you do in your classroom to engage all students, the way you love them unconditionally, the way you support them, advocate for them. Those are all the things that make you an equity teacher leader. Every episode, we're going to unpack another strategy that you can do in your classroom, meet another amazing equity-centered teacher leader across the state of Illinois. It was so great to be in conversation with you today, Jacqueline, another Asian woman rocking out the education field. Just feel incredibly honored to be your friend and incredibly grateful that you're here in service to the students of Illinois.
Thank you so much. It was an absolute pleasure. And let me tell you, listen, baby, ain't no mountain high, ain't no valley low, ain't no river wide enough, baby. If you need me, call me, no matter where you are, no matter how far. I'm always willing to help out incoming teachers in the classroom, and just curious about education.
We're going to definitely drop your information in the show notes if you want to get a hold of Jacqueline San Diego. She'd love to come out and talk to your school community. She'd love to support the wonderful work that special education teachers and all teachers are doing in their classrooms. Thank you so much, Jacqueline. You're amazing.
Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Bye.